Okay, okay. It's Alexander Lawrence, the Portable Infinite, and we're here with Eurydice. We interviewed her before. It's very short. She's the author of F-32. I have a copy right here. You can check that out. I think there's still copies on it. She says since Terracon USA came out, Robert Coover's a fan, Frederick Tootin, a lot of these guys. We were both in this Degenerative Prose, came out in 1995 together. And there's a bunch of pictures of us hanging out over the years. And we've done a couple interviews for Cups magazine. And I think even Richard Kasich's magazine might have done a Eurydice interview. And she, like Cups published, like Eurydice did a thing about Bill Clinton, and it was republished in Harper's, and then through that I got like what's his name, Hunter S. Thompson, like contacted me and was interested. So I sent him a bunch of issues of Cups and stuff. Did I tell you about that?
When he sent me a note, I don't know through you or through someone, but I got a note from him saying that he really liked F-32 and he was whatever, reaching out, but I never got to meet him. I
Yeah,
think he was in Colorado
yeah, yeah,
when
yeah.
he sent that.
He lived in Aspen, and then yeah, I said he liked the piece in because you were talking about Clinton's sexuality and stuff, and he liked that. So I sent him a bunch of issues, just oh yeah, because we're both of us were fans, so I just kind of
Yeah, totally.
but we were talking about the other time we were talking a couple days ago. We were like yeah, book publishing. I mean, I don't know where it's at like in the last 25 years. It kind of went downhill, but in the 90s we were there, like all the big books like David Foster Wallace, Elizabeth Wurtzel, uh all the big book contracts. I interviewed Martin Amis. He had like a big there was a lot of hype around his book. Irving Welsh, Bret Easton Ellis, all these guys. We went to a lot of parties with these guys. What's your take? What do you think about book publishing now? Do you still? I mean, I still occasionally talk to some of these people, like Ira Silverberg, that are still kind of like
Yeah.
hanging around.
Ira is my good friend. I love him. Um, Well, I mean, speaking of Dave Foster Wallace and Liz Wurtzel, I mean, it's just surreal. I went with Liz to Dave's book launch party for Infinite Jest, and I was, good enough friends with both of them, and it's unbelievable to me that they're both gone. And there is a part of me that feels that literature ate them up, and like just swallowed them and chewed them out dead. So I do feel that there was kind of like a heyday, when in the 90s, when we were all being paid a lot of money. I mean, I got six figures. We were paid, like Bill Volman, all of us. We're paid like $2, $3, $5 a word. Um, and we kind of like thought that that would last, but I think that it was just kind of like maybe the end, of the sexual revolution. Like Hugh Hefner had made it a little fashionable to hire writers and pay them well, and we kind of rode the coattails of that. But I think that soon after, with the cultural wars, which like Satyricon USA was maybe the first, kind of like prophetic, look into the cultural wars that were about to happen. And I think with that, like identity politics and all of the kind of like micro division, we lost our place in the culture completely. The place of like the intellectual, was desecrated because white men, were kind of brought down. It was like a mass execution. And those of us who were kind of like mentees of the, like quintessential white male loner intellectual, postmodern American, iconoclast, we kind of, went under with that. So, I mean, Kathy Acker, speaking of Ira, who was also another, dear friend, just gone and gone so long ago. So
Yeah.
I had the sense that there was like a sacrificial moment, culture-wide, you know, where we were scapegoated, like we were built up and then we were, you know, brought down, in the way that, you know, culture goes through these periods, right? And there is always kind of like a type of intellectual that gets sacrificed in some sort of like pogrom. You know, it happened in like every communist society. It happened after every, you know, cultural revolution. So in a sense, it happened here too, with the cultural shift, you know, toward like whatever you want to call it, you know, identity politics, and we haven't recovered from that. So we now get to publish in niche, you know, you know, like venues, and be read by our peers, you know, by like-minded writers and readers, you know, but we have lost that kind of access to the wider public.
Yeah, it seemed like, I mean, publishing, I mean, yeah, when I interviewed a lot of writers in the early 90s, it seemed like yourself, Volman, Dennis Cooper, Mary Gateskill, a lot of writers that I was doing interviews with, you know, they you know, if they weren't teaching, they were writing, making a lot of money like from the magazines. So like that whole magazine culture that was kind of like you said with Spektorsky and Hugh Hefner, Playboy, and then Esquire magazine in the 70s. It's so kind of sort of existed maybe in the early 90s and then kind of faded out, like, and then everything kind of went to the internet and the money thing kind of died out. So
Yep.
so like and then later in the 90s when I moved to New York, it seemed like, yeah, the magazines died out, and then like I was hanging around Brad Ellis and Jonathan Lethem, and it seemed like authors, if they were making any money, it was like through movie options and stuff. That's where they got that. So I learned that lesson. Okay, well, magazines was a good source of income, then movie options were kind of a good source like later, and probably maybe a little bit less these days and stuff. I mean, did you have any comment about those two movements? Or I mean, you talked a little bit about the magazines.
Yeah, movie options became always like the, you know, the hope of last resort for everybody. I mean, you know, look at how long Lydia, you know, Yuknevich is now waiting for that film to be made. It's been like over a decade. So in a sense, it's always like the kind of like, you know, utopia, but extremely rare. You know, it's extremely unlikely. So without that, you know, people who wanted to make a living ran back to academia, and academia rewards homogeneity, right? You all have to sound alike, and
Yeah,
you have to you have to publish like regularly a very similar type of book. So it is the dearth of creativity, like of invention, of avant-garde. There is a lot of work that's still being done by writers who are also teaching, but that kind of irreverent, in your face, you know, avant-garde energy, where like we're speaking on behalf of the future, is disincentivized in academic circles because you want to get tenure.
yeah. Well, in academics, I mean, you also have to teach books that are teachable, that are, you know, that have certain points that you can make, and you know, and then I think in the last 20 years, it's like there's less interest, you know, because of the cell phones and stuff. Like people aren't really, and you don't really get those big readers that are like, you know, really like devouring shit. Because when we were growing up, because me and you grew up in the 60s and 70s, you know, books were like our kind of like where we got, you know, if it wasn't like direct experience, it was like through books and stuff. So we still kind of we still kind of what they call the Gutenberg mind, or the, you know,
Yeah,
the book. We're still book centric in a way, you know, that
very.
maybe this new generation isn't so you know, so bookish as we as we because we grew up in the 60s and 70s.
Yeah, and we loved big books, difficult books. I mean, there was like a whole, you know, almost I don't know, idolization of like the, you know, the doorstopper, dense, right, intellectually challenging book. Um, and the, you know, the quest for the great American novel, all of that, it's all gone. Partly because people have partly because like the internet has shortened our attention spans, and it has multiplied our our potential like attention getters. So there is a greater a plethora of material to read, but that comes at the cost of the depth. So much less depth and much wider kind of like a superficial access and spectrum. And then there is also a redefinition of what writing is, which is much more goal oriented, readership oriented. And then of course self-publishing put like the final nail on that coffin, because it's like there is no such thing as a writer the way it was in the 80s or 90s. Everybody's a writer. Everybody can be a writer because everybody can be published as a writer. Everybody can hire literally any one of us to write their book, which then they will self-publish or find some vanity press or something to publish it for them. I know a lot of successful, well-known writers who you know too, who make most of their money, if they're not teaching in academia, they're making their money by ghostwriting. So that means that they're writing books that look like they are other people's books. So the kind of like intellectual ownership and pride in the material has also been mediated and weakened by just the amount that's out there to read.
Yeah.
So how do you convincingly stand out in that like vast swamp of like reading material that's available to all of us? That's the big question.
Yeah, well, yeah, I mean, like, I was watching a lot of YouTube videos, and the people like try to read Ulysses, and a lot of younger people seem really like frustrated with it, like it's not entertaining. Like I think Ulysses is a fun book. It's like very energetic writing. It's like I mean, like some of the books that came out since the 70s, when it's a big book, a doorstopper, as you say, I find those books a little bit more depressing. They're written by loners that are just gonna, oh, I'm gonna publish, like, especially I got this book over here, Jerusalem by Alan Moore. It just seems I'm gonna publish a 1,000-page book and just fuck with people, and and it seems like there's more of that book, the books, like, maybe Pynchon's is joyous in the same way, or or Sorrentino sometimes, when he writes a big book. But some of these other books just seem kind of like by really like loners who are like almost like autodidactic, and they just kind of like, oh, I'm gonna just do all this learning and shove it into a book and just get it out there, and just like let people, just like, just, this is my scribe, this is my angry letter towards the world kind of thing. What do you think about that? Like the, kind of the Joyce modernist novel, and then today it's like people don't like to read big books, and they're not going to read like the Brothers Karamazov, like, or the version that's coming out like this past year or something, because it's just too much to handle.
Yeah, well, there is an emergent subculture of like, let's say, neurodivergent or techno geeky, males, especially white males, who have found their way back to big books as a way of, self identity, a kind of way to form their own identity. And I appreciate them, wherever they may be. But honestly, I think that our culture somehow has to get to a place where it can converge around a masterpiece again. And we haven't, a literary masterpiece, and we haven't done that in the 21st century at all. So what would what would constitute such a piece of literature that would speak to everyone is, for me, the ultimate question. I personally don't like writing just to publish myself, and luckily I have not been sequestered in academia. I figured out a way to make money through my art, by selling my art to kind of self-fund. And so because I'm not in academia, I feel like I don't need to publish just to say, oh, look, I've published 3 more books. I want to publish when I solve this kind of alchemical key of what what the culture needs in the moment. And if I do that, then I'll feel that it's worthwhile, like the blood and tears and sacrifice, that the book is. And it's not, it's hard work that you do at the cost of life, living.
Yeah, it's like the people that are writers nowadays are sort of it's become like you have to have some kind of financial situation, like you have to come from a elite background now, because it's like you can't really, like it's not as democratic. I mean, you used to think like, oh yeah, I'll just scribble down something, but those people, those kind of people aren't really writing books anymore. And the New York Times just put out like the 100 best books from the last 25 years, like are since 2000. And they've kind of favored people like George Sanders and Elena Ferrante and others. And like out of the 100 books that they mentioned, I hadn't even heard of like 70% of them.
Oh, really?
Yeah,
Wow.
yeah, like oh yeah, I had a list here of some of the books. Yeah, like the ones that I liked. Yeah, Ella Ferrante, W.G. Sebold, Paul Beatty, Ian McEwan, David Mitchell, Annie Ernaux, Jennifer Egan, Zadie Smith, Franzen, Bolano, Colson Whitehead, Ishiguro, Joan Didion. But I don't think that was a good book. I don't think later Joan Didion is very good. And then Richard Powers is okay. But, yeah, they kind of, yeah, or Mary Gates goes in there too. But yeah, they like, of course, Volman's not in there. Dave Eggers isn't in there. A few others that possibly could be in there.
Yeah.
It
I
just
think
seems
that experimental prose has been completely, forgotten for now. From the list that you just read, there isn't a single one.
yeah. I mean, well, the Jennifer Egan and the George Sanders are probably the most
I don't,
adventurous, the most
I
Pope's
don't,
choice in.
I don't consider either an experimental writer, but
Yeah, I don't think
yeah.
so either. But I think they maybe have like one book that's maybe
Yeah.
visually
Oh,
kind of interesting.
yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
so you published. I mean, this book F-32 kind of came out on Fiction Collective, Fiction Collective 2. I mean, that was like kind of a bunch of interesting writers, Ronald Sukenik and stuff, and then you republished on Richard Kasich was a new version. And then you had like an English publisher too. It was kind of separate. I mean,
Virago Press did a different, I think, imprint on it
and
of
then
it. Yeah.
so well, there was in that time in the 80s and early 90s there was like interesting publishers like FC2 and Dalkey Archive and a few coffee house press. I mean, some of them still exist today. I mean, by the time, I mean, I was in this book, but by the time they came to
Mhm.
do my book, kind of FC2 kind of fell apart, and like Sukenik like told me for years, like, oh yeah, we're gonna do your book, but it just never happened. By 2000, it was kind of like a dead issue, and I don't even know what happened. I mean, I guess FC2 is kind of around, but it became more, provincial. It wasn't really like, I mean, that's the other thing. I mean, like in the 90s, I mean, there would be like when the Sunday Times came out, there would be like a big book section, and I don't, and like a lot of the papers, the London Times or the LA Times, they and Vanity Fair had interviews with authors. You don't really see that very much anymore. And then they even like had coverage of FC2 and Dalkey Archive in the New York Times and stuff. Like they don't really, that kind of like disappeared and just
Yeah. yeah,
distribution and money, and just trying to survive and trying to be like an interesting press. It just like, everybody got Harry Pottered out or something, by like yeah, like you said, you heard more about genre fiction. You had to be like true crime or some kind of romance or horror or some kind of thing, to and people will read that, and your loyal audience will be, we'll have a whole book of romance or horror novels or true crime stuff, and the literary
right.
novel kind of went to the
Yeah,
side.
yeah. I think people will still binge read that because that's like escapist. But I think that, I mean, we were like in the heart of like, punk culture and riot girl, culture. And then we got hit repeatedly, it was like one blow after the other, it was the HIV crisis, all of a sudden, like the very thing that we were all about, which was sexual liberation, had turned deadly. By the time we figured all that out and kind of crawled our way out of that hole, it was like 9/11, and the nation became much more conservative, for good reason. I mean, at the time, like it was such a traumatic experience. And then I feel that we have been thrown from then until now into like a continuous loop of like, maybe artificially blown up crises, and then keeping up with technology in every part of life, right? Not just like our phones and our screens and our laptops, but like reproductive and the law and whatever. Just keeping up with the upgrades, has kept people busy. We had like it just, I think, the status quo has been very strong and resilient, in the face of like whatever resistance the intellectual class try to put up, which is the job of the intellectuals, right? Our job is to kind of change the world, to be at the forefront of some sort of real change. But all the different like micro justice movements, and all of the advocacy groups that are kind of like funded by NGOs, and there has been like a huge change since Citizens United in the kind of money that's been poured into the culture. So being a cultural content maker who wants to make things that will shake up the culture, um, has become much less much less simple, because you get constantly distracted by little fires here and there, and you miss like the big story. So and then of course politics, we're not going to discuss politics, but politics has become part of the culture. So whereas it was kind of outside the culture, now it became like it has, everything has been politicized. And again, that means that it has been another source of like bread and circus, right? Keep the people entertained and not focused on on the big picture, on what really matters. So I think we're kind of like blindly like rolling like stones, right? As Bob Dylan would say. um and at some point, inevitably, there will be a moment in a cultural moment or a historical moment that will shake all that stuff up. And I think it's coming. We just have to be astute and ready when it
Well,
does.
going back, kind of unpacking to what you just said, I like talking about the status quo. I mean, I don't think someone like you would even bother with the status quo. Is like, oh, get out of the way. I don't think it's like even an issue really, because because
For me, no, but
I think we both kind of come out of the '60s. The '60s mainstream or status culture or patriarchy of the '60s, and underneath that, there was like a counterculture that was going on, the interesting counterculture, and it was kind of supported through people like Grove Press and like different factions and stuff. And there was a healthy kind of underground for a long time up until like the 90s, where even like Fiction Collective 2 was kind of was like a countercultural kind of movement, like, oh yeah, we're gonna do our own little thing here. And I mean, yeah, you might be right, like maybe around 9/11, like people stop thinking in terms of counterculture and let's just all aim for the center and let's just all try to be more mainstream. So I think it's a problem where it's like, oh, you got to be like really super successful or you can't exist at all. I think that's a problem, because I think it's okay to be a countercultural kind of artist, or I mean, I guess it's, you have to worry about making money and like money to live, but like I think like I think things do bubble up, or people do kind of go down to see what else is going on, and they're just the pop culture to me, like what some of the stuff you're talking about is like is more like even politics is like pop culture. It's not really, I don't really think that the people that are obsessing with politics these days are really know that much about politics at all. They're just kind of talking about it because it's certain things are kind of like in the mainstream and stuff, so they think like, oh yeah, I'll get a I gotta fall in line and stuff. But yeah, what do you think about that whole idea of the healthy counterculture, and where did it go?
Yeah, I know, right? I think that because we lost our the cool factor, meaning the intellectual counterculture lost some of like the coolness, right, associated with it. And so young people who want to be cool kind of left our part of the culture and went into, well, now they're in AI, they're like accelerationists. But they went into different anarcho movements, basically seeking ways that were not through language to undo the culture. So I think there is a lot of countercultural energy out there, but I find it now mostly in technology. There is like there is a very strong accelerationist urge to make us, to push us into a place of like transhuman or cyborg, consciousness, where we can like tweak the self-consciousness as we know it in unpredictable ways, and that along with the crypto movement and crypto world seems to be where a lot of that energy that was in our intellectual circles before has migrated to. I think that they still need the language. They, those two centers of culture are very interesting, in my opinion, and percolating. They still need to translate themselves to the general culture, right? They're still too esoteric, and they need to break out for it to make to have an actual effect. But there is a lot of money out there, stop preventing that. Once the boomers kind of like are gone, I think a lot will change quickly. But boomers control a lot of wealth, and so the culture is kind of chugging along more slowly than it would have otherwise if they were like a normal generation, slightly smaller, slightly less wealthy, with kind of like shorter lifespans. So, but we're getting there.
Yeah, so I mean, some of our Generation X heroes, like Kurt Cobain, like off themselves many years ago, and so
I
so
know.
as both I mean, I guess you identify mainly with the Gen X thing. Maybe we
I
have to
do.
like seize power all of a sudden, like You know,
I know our moment is never gonna come. We're like such a small, short generation.
so, you know, I watched an interview with Ray Kurzweil. He's like a futurist, and he was like talking.
Yeah,
He was talking about
yeah.
AI and singularity, and he thinks it's going to happen if not in 5 or 10 years, maybe 20, or maybe during our lifetimes. If we both live till 2050, you know, maybe we'll see this singularity. And he and so I think Bill Maher asked him, what's that going to how's that going to affect anything? He's going how's it going to affect sex and stuff? He's going, well, it's going to be a lot better. So what do you think about AI and sex? Like, are people, I mean, like they didn't really talk about what would happen, but if you get singularity and you get AI and it's like, and then you bring in sex into the picture. I mean, how could sex be better? I mean, you're just having sex with anybody you want to, like, you know, virtually, or, you know, like we kind of, we've thrown off the bodies. We're not really bodies anymore. We're just this, we're more like avatars or something, and we're having sex with movie stars from the 1920s or something, and or what could be, what kind of sex could be, what kind of, he's describing a sex that's going to be better through AI and singularity. How do you imagine what could that be? I mean, that's what I'm thinking, that we can have like uh, uh near realistic sex with in any kind of way. We can like change shapes, we can change sexes and stuff, or we can, you know, or you know, it's like who, you know, like I mean, it's like in that movie, what is it? No, Blade Runner 2049 or whatever it is, where the guy's like visiting like old girlfriends, you know, like a kind of a, you know, it's like a lame, you know, kind of a ghost, but it's still there, sort of. I mean, it'd be kind of weird. I mean, what do you, can you, you know, like, what do you think
Well,
there?
I mean, you know, there is a lot. That's a huge question. So,
Yes.
you know, a very simple explanation, a very simple kind of like expression of that is, you know, having sex with robots, into which robots we can, you know, transplant the memories or the consciousness of anyone we know as we know them, not as they are, but as we know them, or as these people are willing to, you know, consent. Uh, there is also a sense that, you know, um, through means like Neuralink, you know, we can kind of hook into the computer and interface and adjust our own consciousness to multiplicities, right? So the way that I understand it, but that's just me personally, my personal expectation is that we will be post-individual, which I welcome. Like, you know, my people invented individualism, whatever it was, you know, like 2000 years basically, or 1700 years before Christ. You know, we've run on it for a long time in the West, pretty, you know, pretty successfully, but I think it will be great to get over that limitation, so that you are having sex with another body, but the consciousness of that body can change. So you're still, you know, like, you know, orgasming with this one body, but that body doesn't necessarily have to be like, you know, John Smith. You know, that body could be the body of many different consciousnesses. And in that way, we're becoming kind of post-individual. We're becoming multiplicities, right, of identity. But our relationship with the body is still the, you know, kind of like limited, which I think is wonderful, because I think that the capacities of the body for pleasure are like, you know, hardly tapped. There is a lot more pleasure to be had, and I don't think that we access that pleasure, you know, through like pharmaceutical intervention, you know, pills or cosmetic enhancements necessarily. I do think that we access that pleasure through, you know, neural linked like AI inspired, AGI inspired interfacing, right? So you get the body to come out of its kind of like culturally imposed, self-imposed limitations, cultural lessons, fears and blockages and all of that. And that liberates the body to be, to be everything that the body can be, which is pretty extraordinary experientially. So that's what I would look forward to. Kind of like having sex with someone who has access to, let's say, multiple consciousnesses, which is different, not multiple personalities, but but consciousnesses. Yeah.
Well, but what about like the individual? I mean, what is that? I mean, I don't. I mean, I mean, I don't even know. I don't know if I really buy into. I don't know where the idea of. I guess it's like a Cartesian. I think, therefore I am. Is this
Right.
what is the self? I mean, I guess I mean, we could go on an hour. I mean, I don't know. I mean, to me, like the self, does it? I mean, the self, is it anything? Because it doesn't. Maybe it doesn't survive death. Maybe we don't know because we haven't been there. So how can it be a thing? We are. It's like there's.
Those are two separate things, right? So like the self, as I understand it, is the ego, meaning it's who we are from the moment of like baptism, right? We come out of the womb and we're given a name, relationships, a language, a nationality, a tribal, collective identity and relations. And so by the time we reach whatever puberty, when we begin to have our own individual sense of self, our own I, differentiated from that of like our clan or our parents or whoever, we're pretty much programmed. So that programming is the self, and that's what, in my opinion, would be wonderful to deprogram at will. What you're talking about is the soul, the psyche, the like metempsychosis, the psyche, that theoretically, if you believe in reincarnation, can go from oneself to another and from one body to another. So that I don't think that that's synonymous to the self in the sense of the cultural identity. I think the soul may well live beyond the limitations of body and consciousness and mental consciousness. I don't know, but that's a separate, I'm talking of the individual as that sense of self,
Yeah.
right? Alexander Lawrence.
Yeah. Yeah, but that might, but that might still be something that's like drilled into me and stuff. I just kind of accepted it. I just kind of like, and it's a self that doesn't survive death, maybe,
I don't think that survives death. Yeah.
Well,
the soul may survive it, but
okay,
yeah.
we got some heavy. Let's take a break here, and
Okay.
let me we got some heavy thoughts. Like, okay, everyone. I mean, we. All right, we're back for part two. We were talking about some heavy shit when we had a break there, and yeah, yeah, like self from soul. I'm not talking about soul. But, I mean, I'm kind of. I mean, I grew up Catholic. I'm an atheist. I don't. I don't see the idea of self like surviving death. I don't know. I haven't died yet, so I don't know. Maybe there's a possibility, but I don't come from a religious thing. But that self. I mean, and like even myself at different times in my life, I felt like it's a different self. It's not. I don't really see, because I've hung around. We're both 60. We look back at our life, and the young person, we were kind of like that way. The young Eurydice was way more maybe. Well, no, I'll just talk about myself. was way more arrogant. If I didn't know something, I would just bluff my way. I would do that. Like these days, I either know things or I don't talk about them, kind of things that, there's more because I've read more, I've experienced more, I know more things. So, when I'm like 20, that was a different person, in relationships, you're a different person, you're kind of like this thing. So what is that self? What is that? Who is that guy? Who is that girl? What, is it a real thing? Is it just a kind of thing that you convince yourself is and I don't know. You know, I mean, there's that idea that I think like Jean Genet or somebody had that we're all like the same person kind of thing, like we're all like, but we're all the same person in different bodies kind of thing. And I think he might have got it from some philosopher or something. I mean, I feel like there's some kind of truth in that. Like I mean, like Jean Genet has this essay where he's talking about seeing some guy in a train and stuff, and kind of like feeling like we're all kind of connected and we're all like the same person. We're just like the same person in different bodies. I think he was like saying, and I don't know. What would you say to that? That I
Um, Again, I mean, I am spiritual. So from the point of view of spirituality, I can see that we're all one. We're like one, one essence. But from the point of view of personality, an ego, I don't see that. I think that we're very much who we are. Um, I think that who we identify as may change because we're all constantly changing and the culture around us changes. As we change, we are all together changing it together. But I think that the basics of who we each are as an individual are pretty much steady from the get-go. Like, from like the toddlerhood to old age, we're basically the same uh, personality, hardcore personality. And then there are variations of that. Um,
Okay, I have another question. What about astrology? I mean, didn't like I mean, when they invented astrology, didn't they kind of see the world as kind of a cone kind of thing, like straight up? And then you got Copernicus, and then it's like, okay, well, everything's it's kind of, Copernicus kind of changed things because no, this is not, we're not in a cone structure, we're in a different structure. And so like astrology, is astrology like really scientific? Does it mean anything, or is it just like it's kind of like some pop psychology that we kind of like explain the world, because I mean, I'm a Taurus, you're a Pisces or whatever. It's like, but I mean, I don't I mean, yeah, maybe I get along better with this crowd of people, but I don't know if it's accurate, scientific. What do you think about astrology, is my question.
I think that it's legitimate. Obviously, not everything, when practiced superficially is a gimmick and bullshit. And at the same time, everything when studied in depth is a form of scientific knowledge. So I think that what we now call science is very limited. I think that astrology is one of the sciences. um, I think that there are many kind of like more natural sciences that only enhance our scientific understanding of the planet and of ourselves. I think that anything that expands uh, our kind of like explanations is a plus. So personally, I like it because it offers a counterbalance, um, and um, and I don't live my life according to it by any means at all. But I do find it, a helpful portal because it helps to get me out of myself, um, my kind of interior monologue, often, and that's always, you know, a strength, a source of strength. When I get out of myself, I understand things from a greater perspective, and that's, you know, the source of wisdom. So yeah, I like it. I mean, I also like it because you know, I'm a geek. Like, I just love how esoteric it gets. You can just go and go and go, and you know, there's a lot of math, there's a lot of mysticism. You know, it's just kind of endless, the depths that, you know, you can surf, right? So it's cool. In a sense, it's similar to what we were talking about, you know, before, you know, coding or you know, there are types of scientific pursuit that are endless and bottomless, and that's exciting.
Yeah, what about like tarot cards and stuff? Is that a way? Is that legitimate, or is it just like a way of people like take your money? You know.
Yeah, I mean, listen, I would never pay. I don't pay for this stuff. I think that, you know, money like that is not, yeah, isn't useful in esoteric experiences. Um,
Yeah.
Tarot cards, you know, tarot cards, tarot, the tarot deck is another portal if you use it, you know, if you use it well, meaning you kind of like know something about each card, especially the major arcana, the archetypes, and if you stare at the image long enough, it kind of takes you somewhere where you might not have gone on your own. So as a focal point that can take you into another world, I think it can be very useful, but that again takes practice on your own. And it could be anything. It doesn't have to be a tarot card. It could be, you know, a sacred icon, or it could be, you know, like a flame, right? The flame of a candle, or it could be any you know, object that allows you to kind of access, you know, what we tend to call simplistically an altered state, right? So I think all of that's great.
Yeah, I like tarot cards, but I just think, I mean, they've been kind of misused. It seems like, that, and it just seems like a lot of people I know, all of a sudden they became tarot card readers overnight, or or they start selling real estate, or they start becoming life coaches. Like the life.
Oh my God, yes, the life coach craze.
If you get these people like what they want, I mean, you're not really a life coach. I would trust you more as a life coach than these people that are like the life coach. And they're all of a sudden an expert. They're like people that like, I mean, they don't live the most exemplary lives, and all of a sudden now they're a life coach. It's like, oh, really? Is that for real?
You know, you can like just hang a shingle outside your door and start telling people how to live their lives. It's unreal. And then you know what they charge? Thousands of dollars. Thousands of dollars. And then, you know, the ultimate hook is that you convince your client that they can become life coaches. Oh my God, it's endless, you
So it's a
know.
pyramid scheme. But if you meet one of those guys and you have some success in life, maybe or maybe meet a partner or something, maybe it's good. I don't know, but yeah, I kind of like avoid those kind of people. I mean, when you're doing this podcast, you've been doing it a while. I mean, you wrote Satyricon USA, and got to do all the.
I started the podcast in 2017 with Me Too, but at the first 2 years, it was only on local radio. So like I don't have access to a lot of those shows.
Yeah.
And then when I figured out that I should put it as a podcast, you know, whatever recordings from that I had were the original episodes, but there were many more. So as the radio show, it was going on for almost 2 years, and it was a response to Me Too. And I started it because I wanted to write a book called Speak Sex. So it was kind of a form of like field research, like I'd done for Satyricon USA. And some of the people who would agree to speak on record, I would just, interview on radio and then on the podcast.
Yeah.
Um, and I gathered a lot of material, but then at some point I decided, I don't want to publish this book because I will be, even more pigeonholed. And I just want to kind of keep thinking about this and see where it will ultimately take me. So
Yeah. So I mean, you've been doing this for a while. You've interviewed all sorts of people, people, they're tantric people, there's
yeah.
people that are, kind of maybe rape survivors or
Yes, yes, yes,
all sorts. I mean,
yes. I've interviewed everyone and anyone you can think
well,
of. This
well,
today I posted an episode because yesterday I interviewed this writer Sarah Gerard. She
yeah, yeah,
wrote the
yeah,
true crime book about her friend who was murdered
yeah,
in Brooklyn. Yeah.
yeah. I was listening.
Anyway,
Before we did this, I was listening to a little bit of it, get the
yeah,
latest.
yeah. I just talked to her yesterday. So it's it's interesting because like she's part of a new generation of writer. So part of what we do, with this podcasting is we stay, kind of like vibrant in the zeitgeist. I feel that I'm very current because I speak to
Well,
people who are like in their
well,
20s.
let me let me ask you some general questions about sex, my own kind of personal peccadillos maybe. When should a person first get into start having sex? What at what age? What should they how should, like, a starter kit, what should they be getting into? What, like,
um, well, when that's a big
I
question.
mean, I've always been like a kind of a one guy, one girl. I can't, like, like these people these days, like, I can't keep like three or five people in the Rolodex all at the same time. I mean, one person at a time, it's like it's too confusing, it's like, I don't want to hurt anybody's feelings. It's okay, okay, that one ends and then you're kind of doing it with somebody else and stuff. I don't know. But
Yeah,
when I was younger, I mean, there was, I think this is probably true of a lot of people. I mean, you go to high school and you kind of have like a group of people with girls and guys, and then you end up, a couple of you become, couples, and then maybe that doesn't work out. So you kind of switch with each other, and then you're going out with, this guy's ex-girlfriend, and then even after high school, maybe you go out with some other people. So I think it's kind of like, it's I guess for a lot of people it's kind of like group sexuality is probably like group oriented, in some strange way, like that in the beginning, like for most people in America.
yeah, yeah. I think in the beginning because you don't know what you're doing. You're a teenager, right? And you kind of looking to your peers. You definitely don't want to ask your parents or do what your parents do. So unless you go online, you would most likely look to what your friends are doing or the older siblings of your friends and try to imitate that. You have all these like new urges, sexual urges, and you have this like brand new body, like, I mean, it's already like a huge change in self consciousness and self awareness because you're a child, right? To, and you don't identify as a sexual person. You don't have desires. No one is treating you as a sexual person unless there is an abuser around you. Um, so suddenly it seems like overnight, you wake up and you have like, if you're a girl, you have, breasts and you have curves and hips and a perky butt. And if you're a guy, same thing, you get like, uh, muscles and you pecs and you get, hard-ons, you wake up with them, you go to bed with them, you don't know, no one is quite sure how to handle it. And we come from like 6,000 years of patriarchy, which basically were like, we were educated by being told no, right? No to everything. Like you learn what to do by being told no, and whatever you can squeeze, whatever behavior you can, keep doing when so much is forbidden, that's who you become. So now in this century, there is a more permissive kind of sense, but no one really knows how to be in the world. And I think that it's become very meta. Like what's man, what's woman, what's romance, what's transactional. what's meaningful, what's performative. It often is hard to tell because a lot of our behaviors are still leftovers from like the patriarchy, which is dead. So it's an obsolete system, but still most of our behaviors come from it, and behavior changes slowly. So a lot of like the need, the reasoning behind this type of behavior is gone, but we're still behaving this way. Um, I think that like young people, obviously should be sexual. I think they should be experimental. I don't think that they should, I think that they should be discouraged from deciding who they are, and what their sexuality is for the first like maybe even 10 years of being sexual. I'm a big supporter of like experimentation.
Yeah.
And I think, like like you said before, you think that you know everything when you're like 18 and 19. But, if the culture encourages you to kind of, experiment, rather than commit to an identity or commit to a person or commit to a course of studies or commit to a profession, all that stuff, that's the best way to go.
Well, let me just.
I think that if we could turn some of our behaviors into ritualistic versions of themselves rather than legally binding, that would help a lot. It would help us evolve and kind of figure out what our next system of like sexual and romantic relations is going to look like. But we're in transition. We're changing as a species, and it's going to take us 50 years minimum, but we're changing.
Well, getting back to what you've used this word patriarchy a few times. That just means the sexuality and the is kind of based around the family with the father on top and stuff, and the like for many years, like women didn't own property, women didn't have jobs, and the man was like the one that made all the money and controlled a lot of stuff, and some of those structures kind of broke down in the 60s because we had like kind of like the like people stopped going to church in the 60s. There was like feminism and the pill and civil rights, and a lot of the structures that from the preceding years kind of collapsed and stuff, and there was like a new I mean, we've had almost 50 years of this kind of new post patriarchy, as I or
Right,
post
right.
family, the family, the because I grew up, I went to Catholic school for a few years, and I kind of that whole kind of people had like a classical education, and we weren't staring at iPhones or anything, and
Mm-hmm.
and we were reading, you would still learn Latin in school and all that stuff.
Me
And
too.
all
Yeah.
that stuff's gone. And we don't have that any of that anymore, and and then the Reagan 80s could see as kind of a backlash to that the what you mentioned as the sexual freedom, or what was it, what would you call it, the
Yeah. Well, I
the
mean, I don't know what would
well,
um
I was just talking about patriarchy and just like
right. So
what I mean.
this is right. What you're saying is that, we are in a time of post-patriarchy. So basically, with the invention of the pill and IVF and paternity testing and all of that, there was no longer need for the patriarchy. The patriarchy was a system that was put in place to kind of guarantee patrilineage, right? Because before the patriarchy, a guy never could be sure whether a kid was his. So, patriarchy was a new system where like every man would get a room of his own for life, but he had to pay for it. So it was a way to kind of subjugate men to work within the system to make the wages necessary to support a wife and her children, their descendants. Um, so it was kind of like a way to control men as well as women, right? Because men were born with this like debt, right? Like you couldn't have a family or a legacy or a sense of yourself in the world if you didn't support a wife and her kids. That was the system. Like your job was to get married for both men and women. And a man who married, was like yoked. So both sides, were kind of in a way, entrapped into this system of cultural, how can I put it,
It was like
it's
it was like a meta narrative that you had to like
right. There was no way out. It was like there was a monopoly. So we call it patriarchy. I don't think the patriarchy means that men were in charge. It just means that the system was set up in a way that was focused toward guaranteeing patrilineage. The the superiority of the paternal rather than the maternal life. Because the maternal lineage is natural. Nobody needs to do anything about it. Okay, so when that was dissolved for many reasons that we are not going to go into now, we no longer were a patriarchy. When you have serial divorces and when you have, people like paying, alimony or whatever it's called, there is no such thing as patriarchy, but men are still obligated to follow these rules as if there were something like patriarchy, but there isn't, because a guy who pays, he would only pay for the guarantee that for the rest of his life he would have, a womb that belongs to him exclusively, right? For both sexual and reproductive reasons. So that no longer can be guaranteed. And so everything has changed. It's like a woman gets to choose whether or not she wants to have kids and become a mother. It's sex doesn't translate to reproduction. And conversely, you can reproduce without having sex. So the rules of the game have changed completely, but we don't know what we are anymore because they were set in stone for that system. That's why we're in this place of like transition, which is kind of chaotic, right? Because things have fallen apart, but they haven't reconstituted into some other, meaningful system.
Yeah, there's some problem also with the Constitution because it was written at a time by some people were slave owners and some people weren't slave owners, and they didn't even consider slaves as human in that time and stuff, and so they weren't even like, and then they kind of changed it to, oh, they're 3/5 of a human and stuff, and so like slavery, like they wrote the original Constitution without the, like, slaves were not people, like, there was like there was at least 4 million or so here in America, like, and then they, they had a civil war, but the blacks still lived in, say, they had Jim Crow laws. They signed contracts with they had the same job, but they signed the contract with the previous slave owner, and they still lived in the same places, and they lived in slave-like conditions even after the Civil War. So, and then it was up till civil rights, that the blacks just didn't have any rights at all. They could, they were like kind of like non-people, and and then I mean, that's part of American life too, just this whole kind of thing, like, these people not recognizing a whole uh group of people as like non-human, that are like, like, and it was like, and these people were part of American life for many years and stuff, and it was like, and it's just weird, like, like when when World War II happened, and we helped write the Japanese Constitution and in the 40s, or the German Constitution. It's even better because it's more modern and stuff. It doesn't have like all that extra baggage for like from 300 years ago, because like it's from a different, and they always say like stuff like all these guys were Christians, or I think maybe some of them were, but some of them were atheists, some of it, and some of them were slave owners, and some of them didn't even, so when they were making rules, they didn't even like, it wasn't slavery, like saying like slavery like was slavery is bad, like that came like way later, like 100 years later after they started America, like they didn't even, and it's still sort of in the background, like they did, not that we, I don't want to get into politics too much, but it does have to do with like ownership and and all these structures. Yeah, and even the Citizens United, just like this certain legal language that's like in American culture that you can't, that is kind of slippery. It's like, what the hell does this mean? Is it, corporations are individuals? That doesn't make any sense. That's even today, like, or slaves are not people. Oh, they're 3/5 of a person. There's a lot of weird slippery language in legal things, and yeah, I mean, you would say like that has to do with the patriarchy and these structures
Mm-hmm.
that kind of, I mean, have pre-existed our lives and stuff, and just kind of we try to make them, and I mean, a lot of this, a lot of these social rules, these legal things. I mean, I think a lot of young people like look at these laws and stuff and just go, oh, let's just throw it away. Let's start anew, because they don't really make any sense. But I mean, but then you take away the whole culture of the whole history of the country and stuff. Like it's whatever.
Yeah, unfortunately, you cannot, uh, you know, change a civilization too soon. You can only end it, or incrementally, like upgrade it, like the way that we do computer programming upgrades. And each time you kind of like reprogram, we're slowly reprogramming ourselves culturally. But to make like a full-on change is the one that's needed. We do need like a huge change. But if we were to make it all at once, we wouldn't survive it culturally. And the risk is that if a culture dissolves, as cultures have, like the Roman civilization, right? Or when a culture dissolves, it may go through a long period of like dark aging, where a lot of like knowledge is lost, and then you have to start back from scratch. Whatever Galileo saying, oh, the earth is round or whatever, we already knew that, like in Alexandria, in Ptolemy's time. But basically a lot of knowledge was lost when like the libraries of Alexandria were burned, and millions of copies of books were lost. So things can happen. Unimaginable loss of knowledge can happen. It happened possibly during after the time of the pyramids. Like if there were a continent named Atlantis, it's gone forever. So that's where the kind of like the struggle is, I think, in the current moment. How do we preserve what's worth preserving and change what has to be changed, because it is already changed for all intents and purposes, and do that in a harmonious way, right, where we don't like fight each other to the death.
Yeah, what are we fighting? What are we fighting for? What are we gonna preserve or whatever? Well, getting back to what we were talking about before, we were talking about Neuralink and AI and stuff, and sexuality. But I was also thinking like getting back to Kurzweil and like improvement, like maybe this Neuralink, we can like kind of like put in like a disc in our brain. Like I think if it's gonna be like human AI together. You got to work. It has to be like a working together. You can't have like AI robots taking over, and like humans like being I guess you could, but I don't see it like that. But I see it as a kind of a, like transhuman, like AI human together and somehow. And so maybe another benefit of this Neuralink would be like people can punch in languages and we could start speaking different languages immediately, like in the Matrix, where Neo just kind of like gets a computer program in his brain, and then he can, oh, I can fly this thing now. So we can and that'll be a good thing because we could speak French or Greek or any languages that because we have like the AI Neuralink thing. What do you think about that?
I think that's going to happen very soon. The languages, very soon. Um, what I would like to see is that we don't, in the process, devalue the body too much, because we're going in this direction, and I think that that's very dangerous. I think that we have from the hundreds of thousands of years when we were like hunter gatherers and all that before we became the modern sapiens, we have a store of like a huge store of knowledge that's more like intuitive and natural, right? Knowledge, but we still use it to survive. Like a lot of stuff that we just feel and know how to do. When we're put on the spot, we kind of have a sense of what to do. So that comes a lot from kind of like innate knowledge, inherent, not taught knowledge. And I think that we need to value that knowledge of the body as much as we value like the mentally intellected knowledge, of the mind. So that's really my only worry about transhumanism, is that we need to do it in a way that incorporates embodied knowledge and experience. Because if we lose that, we lose a lot of our survival instinct. And it's not like we are all at the same place of civilizational development, right? So there is always a chance that while we in the West are busy, merging with our cyber, sisters and brothers, the other parts of the world that are still, entrenched in like the agricultural stage, will take over because they will be much better equipped to deal with a natural disaster, right? And an unexpected catastrophe, something like that. So I think, finding ways to value the body as much as the mind, I think is important.
Yeah,
Kind of like,
I agree with that.
Yeah.
Well, like I don't know, we have a limited time here. So what
Okay.
what about your writing? Okay, everybody, if you want to check it out, you have a website. Eve,
Yeah.
what
Eurydice, it's EURYDICE.net, eurydice.net.
yeah.
The podcast is Speak with Eve, I think, .com, speakwitheve.com. It's like on YouTube, Audible, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, everywhere. And I am now working on, I'll tell you what I've been working on the past few years. It's kind of three different projects. One project is this kind of bigger work that I call I call it procreativism, and it's kind of a theory of the history of the world based on our procreative relations, our reproductive relations. And in it, I kind of like rewrite what it is to be a woman, a man, a mother, a father, all that. And I, advocate for a universal mother income, not based on taxation. And for the liberation of fathers, right? Fathers lib, I call it. So that's one work. The other one is a rewriting of the story of Eurydice and Orpheus, where she has a voice. It's from her point of view, and that's like fiction, kind of mythical fiction. And the third one is kind of a memoir. It started as an exploration of what it meant for me to be a lesbian, right? A born lesbian. When I learned what that meant, because I learned what a lesbian was sexually before I had a sexuality or a sexual, preference. So in a sense, I was considered a lesbian because I was born on Lesbos, which means I'm a lesbian. And once I learned the other meaning of the word, it kind of became formative for me for a long time. So working on that and kind of telling the story of my life based on these lesbian experiences it was the beginning of like a memoir. So it may end up being, the first book in like what is a longer memoir, which working title now is The Education of Eve Eurydice. So I'm writing, which is good.
Yeah. And yeah, I mean, well, I didn't.
Hopefully I won't have to make money. Every time like that I get deep into writing projects, then I, run out of money. I have to stop and do something else and, make fun.
Yeah, I mean, I have a bunch of books that, I just kind of like, well, why don't I just finish them? Why not? Just put them out there in the world and stuff. And, why not? And, just, I know like people want shorter books these days, but, yeah, but, and you can have like, Bill Volman, he wrote like his lesbian book a few years ago. Now you can have the real
Yeah.
Eve Eurydice.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, like, yeah, so like
Well, I can compare my lesbianism to Bill's lesbianism any day.
so it looks like you're looking good, and like it's good,
You too, Alexander. You too.
and I like your art, and Eurydice's done films, and she's done this real big artwork, and she's definitely she lives in Miami, and she's like definitely part of the art scene there, like for quite a number of years now, and
Yeah.
you didn't know, and like the Art Basel like is a big event over there all the time. She's been involved with that a few times. Every
Yes. Yes.
every year.
Yeah. Every year. Yep. Miami has been good to me, I must say. But you can't be writing. You gotta make stuff and sell it.
So
So
yeah, I mean we've been talking about doing this for a while. I mean it could go on, but we'll do another one
yes.
when
Yes. Well, I'm glad we finally met,
when some of
and thank you for having me. That's
when some
so
of the
fun.
books come out, we'll do it. We'll do another interview and stuff.
Okay, that's it. And listen, we have a deal. We're gonna meet again. I mean, we're holding on until 2050, and we'll do another
Yeah,
another talk like this.
yeah. A lot of us, yeah, because a lot of our mutual friends have died. Like
I know.
out of the I mean, there's 50, maybe there might be 200 people we both know over the years, and half of them have died in the last 20 years and stuff. And uh,
That's right.
we're
Yeah.
going, oh well, it's me and you. I think it's going to be me
Yeah.
and you, like uh, in a while. So like, we'll see. We'll definitely do something in 2050 and celebrate.
Yes.
The
Yeah.
hey, thanks.
Yeah.
Thank you for talking to me. We'll talk.
Yeah.
Okay, bye.
Okay. All right. Bye.